The day I found out, I was standing in my own kitchen, holding a document I was never supposed to see. My hands were shaking, not because I was angry. Not yet. Because the signature at the bottom of that paper, the one that transferred my name off everything we had built together, was mine, except I had never signed it. My husband had been forging my name for 2 years. His mother had been helping him. And the family I had spent 7 years trying so hard to love had voted, at a dinner I was not invited to remove me from the will, remove me from the business, and replace my name with hers. I had cooked for these people. I had loaned them money without being asked to repay it. I had shown up every single time, and they had been planning this from the beginning. What they did not plan was that I kept every receipt, every transfer, every message, every paper. And I had a lawyer on speed dial before any of them even realized I knew. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Not about me, about you. Think about the person in your life who you have given the most grace to, the one you have forgiven the most times, the one you told yourself was just going through something, just under pressure, just needed more time. Now ask yourself this: at what point does loyalty become something they use against you? Stay with me, because what happens next is not just about betrayal. It is about what a woman finds when she finally stops looking away. If you have ever loved someone who was quietly building a door behind your back, this story is for you. Drop a comment before this ends. I want to know whether you think some betrayals can ever be forgiven, or whether some doors, once you find them, should only ever open one way. My name is Layla, and I want to be honest with you from the start. I was not a victim who never saw anything. I was a woman who saw things and chose to believe the kindest version of what she was seeing. That is a very different thing. I was not blind. I was generous with my interpretation, and I kept being generous long after generosity had stopped making sense. That is the part that still sits heavy in my chest when I think about those years. Not what they did, but how long I let myself look the other way while they were doing it. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was 30. He had this way of speaking that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in any room. He asked questions, real ones. He remembered the answers. On our third date, he remembered that I had mentioned, only once in passing, that my grandmother used to make cardamom tea on Sunday mornings. He showed up with a small bag of cardamom pods and nothing else. No flowers, no grand gesture, just that. I told my best friend Rima the next morning that I was probably going to marry this man. I was right. I just did not know yet what that would cost me. We were married 18 months later. The wedding was small. My side, my mother, Rima, my cousin Dina, and a handful of old friends. His side, his parents, his older brother Marcus, Marcus's wife Celine, and about 30 relatives I met for the first time that day and spent the next 7 years trying to belong to. His mother, Patricia, hugged me at the reception and said, "You are family now." She held my face in both hands when she said it. I remember thinking, this is what it must feel like to be chosen. I spent 7 years chasing that feeling. Patricia was the kind of woman who ran her family the way a general runs a campaign. Organized, strategic, warm on the surface, but always calculating what the warmth was buying her. She had 4 children. Daniel was the youngest. She had a particular way of loving him that was not really love but more like possession. Every decision he made went through her first. I told myself it was cultural. I told myself it was generational. I told myself a lot of things. 6 months into our marriage, Daniel and I started a small business together. It was a logistics and supply coordination company, nothing glamorous, but we were good at it. I handled the finances, the contracts, the client relationships, and most of the operational load. Daniel handled the vendor side and brought in the early clients through his network. We were a real team in those first years. We built something from nothing. By year 3, we had 12 employees and a solid regional client base. By year 4, the business was turning a profit that surprised even us. That was the year Patricia started showing up to the office. At first it was sweet. She brought food. She sat with the staff. She asked questions about how things worked. Daniel loved it. He grew up watching her run the family's small import business, he said. Having her around felt like a blessing, he said. I smiled and agreed and told myself I was being territorial and unfair. I was not territorial. I was reading a pattern I did not yet have all the pieces to name. By the end of R4, Patricia was coming in 3 times a week. She had started referring to the business as hours in conversations with relatives. Daniel never corrected her. Small thing, I noted it, filed it away, kept smiling. The first real alarm was not about money, it was about a name. We had a client dinner, a formal one, with a corporate client worth about a third of our annual revenue. I had spent 6 weeks building that relationship. I knew the client's team personally. I had drafted the proposal, negotiated the terms, and set the agenda for the dinner. 3 hours before we were supposed to leave, Daniel told me his mother would be joining us. I said that was fine, not ideal, but fine. When we arrived at the restaurant, I discovered the seating arrangement had been changed. Patricia was seated next to the lead client. I was seated at the far end. When the client later sent a thank you note, it was addressed to Daniel and his mother. My name was not in it. I went home that night and sat in the bathroom for a very long time. Daniel said I was being sensitive. He said Patricia had charmed them. He said it was a good outcome regardless of who got credit. He held my hand and said, "You know what you built. Why does it matter who the client thinks built it?" I told him it mattered because next time that client had a question, they would call the wrong person. He laughed and said I was overthinking it. I let it go. I should not have let it go. But here is what I want you to understand about that moment. When someone you love tells you that you are overthinking something and you want to believe them, and the alternative is to believe that something is very wrong, you choose the easier story. Not because you are weak. Because love is supposed to be the safe place, and admitting the safe place has a leak in it is one of the hardest things a person can do. I chose the easier story at least a dozen more times over the next 2 years. The business grew, we expanded into 2 new regions, we hired more staff, I was working 70-hour weeks. Daniel was working hard too, but his hours had started to drift in a different direction, more time with vendors, more time with his family, more client entertainment that I was not always included in. I told myself he was just networking. He was building the external face of the company. I had always been the engine. He had always been the face. That was how we worked. What I did not notice, until much later, was that the legal documents had started to drift too. Our original business registration listed both of us as equal co-owners. But somewhere between year 4 and year 5, a second operating agreement had been filed. I did not know about this because I was busy, because I trusted him, because my name was still on our bank accounts and our original contract, and I had no reason to go looking at filings I thought I was already aware of. The second agreement had new language in it. Language that introduced a third party as a silent operational advisor with profit-sharing rights. That third party was Patricia. I did not find this document in year 5. I found it in year 7, on a Tuesday afternoon, when I was looking for a vendor contract in Daniel's home office and opened the wrong drawer. The folder was labeled simply, Restructure. Inside it were 6 documents. I sat on the floor of his office and read every one of them. My hands were calm. My mind was completely still. That is what real shock feels like, not shaking, not screaming, just a terrible, crystalline clarity. The first document was the amended operating agreement. My ownership stake had been reduced from 50% to 20%. The difference had been redistributed. 30% to Daniel, 30% to Patricia, formalized now as a named co-owner. The document was dated 14 months earlier. The second document was a property transfer form for a commercial storage unit we owned jointly. The ownership had been transferred entirely to Daniel. My name had been removed. There was a signature line where my name appeared. I had not signed it. The third document was a loan agreement. The business had borrowed against itself, against collateral that included my personal assets, to fund an expansion project I had not been briefed on. The amount was $240,000. The fourth document was a bank statement for an account I did not recognize. The account was in the name of our business, but the statements were being mailed to Patricia's address. Over 18 months, approximately $90,000 had moved through this account without appearing in any of the financial reports I reviewed. The fifth document was a legal letter addressed to Daniel from an attorney I did not know. It referenced an estate planning session. It listed assets. Our house was on the list. Our joint investment account was on the list. The letter suggested that certain assets be moved before any legal co. Implications arise. The letter was dated 8 months ago. The sixth document was a will amendment. Daniel's parents' will. My name had been in it. I had been told by Patricia herself, at a family gathering 3 years earlier, that she and Gerald had included me because I was truly one of them now. The amendment removed my name and replaced it with Celine's, Marcus's wife. The amendment was dated 11 months ago. It had been signed by both Patricia and Gerald. A note in the margin, in Patricia's handwriting, read, "Better this way." I sat on that floor for 40 minutes. I did not move. I read every document twice. Then I took photographs of every single page with my phone. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it. I went downstairs. I started making dinner. When Daniel came home an hour later, I kissed him on the cheek and asked him how his day was. He said it was good. I said mine was fine. That night, after he fell asleep, I called Rima. Rima is the kind of friend who does not panic. She is also the kind of friend who, when you tell her something terrible, does not immediately say that there must be an explanation. She listened to everything I told her. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Layla, you need a lawyer before you need anything else. Not a conversation, not a confrontation, a lawyer." I had the photographs. I had the documents. I needed someone who could tell me what they meant legally and what options I had before I made a single move that could be used against me. I found an attorney named Sandra through a referral from Rima's older sister, who was a paralegal. I met with Sandra 3 days later. I brought printed copies of all 6 documents and a timeline I had written out of everything I remembered, every unusual financial conversation, every meeting I had been excluded from, every moment that had felt off but that I had explained away. Sandra read everything. She asked me precise questions for about an hour. Then she put her pen down and looked at me and said, "Layla, what you have here is not a misunderstanding. What you have here is a coordinated pattern of financial manipulation and, in at least 2 cases, what appears to be document fraud. Your signature appears on instruments you did not execute. That is forgery. The loan against your personal assets without your knowledge or written consent is a significant legal problem. The secret account is a significant legal problem. We have a lot to work with." A lot to work with. I drove home from that meeting with the strangest feeling. It was not relief. It was not anger. It was something closer to a door opening inside me that I had not known was closed. A door into a version of myself who did not need to be chosen by Patricia, who did not need Daniel to confirm her worth, who had built something real, had the documents to prove it, and was not going to watch it disappear without consequences. I told no one except Rima. I continued going home every night. I continued making dinner. I continued going to the office. I continued being kind to Patricia when she came in. I continued being the woman they all expected me to be. And while I was doing that, Sandra was doing her work. The forensic accountant Sandra, brought in, took 3 weeks. She was a quiet woman named Elaine who wore reading glasses on a chain and asked for access to 6 years of financial records. I gave her everything I had on my end. What she found extended well beyond what I had seen in Daniel's folder. The secret account had been opened 4 years earlier. 4 years. It had been funded by small transfers, never large enough to trigger an automatic flag, drawn from the business operating account. Over 4 years, the total amount moved through that account was just over $160,000. About $60,000 of it had been withdrawn in cash. The rest had been transferred to an account Elaine traced to a numbered holding company. The holding company's registered agent was Patricia. The loan against our joint personal assets had been executed using a power of attorney document I had never signed. Sandra confirmed this was the second instance of what appeared to be document fraud involving my name and signature. There were also discrepancies in the client billing records going back 2 years. 2 major clients had been invoiced at rates higher than the rates recorded in our internal system. The difference, about $40,000 over the period, had been recorded as a vendor expense and had flowed out of the business without appearing in any category I had visibility over. What had been built in the 7 years of our marriage was not just a business. It was a quiet machine for taking what I built and moving it somewhere I could not follow. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I know some of you are thinking, how did she not notice? And the answer is that I was not looking. Not because I was careless, but because low. Oaking would have required me to believe that the man who showed up with cardamom pods on our third date was capable of this. The heart does not want to run that calculation. The heart keeps finding reasons not to run it. And people who do what Daniel and Patricia did, they know that. They count on it. But I was running it now. Sandra advised me to prepare for what she called a controlled revelation. We would not confront Daniel with emotion. We would not send an angry text. We would not call a family meeting. We would do this through process, through documentation, and through the legal system, which does not care about anyone's feelings, but cares enormously about signed agreements, forged signatures, and missing money. Before any direct confrontation, we needed to secure certain things. Sandra filed an emergency motion to freeze a subset of the disputed business assets, based on the evidence of the second operating agreement and the power of attorney fraud. We also filed a formal complaint with the state attorney's office regarding the forged documents. This was not about drama. It was about making sure that by the time Daniel realized what was happening, there were institutional processes already in motion that he could not simply explain away over dinner. I also, quietly, had all of my personal financial accounts separated from any joint access Daniel had. This was Sandra's instruction, and it was the right one. You do not confront someone who has already shown they are willing to forge your name while they still have access to your accounts. It took 11 more days. On a Wednesday morning, Daniel received a certified letter from Sandra's office. The letter formally notified him that I was aware of the amended operating agreement, the forged power of attorney, the undisclosed loan, and the transfers to the external account. The letter outlined the legal claims being initiated and requested that he retain counsel and make no further changes to any joint or business assets pending legal review. I was at the office when he called me. He called 6 times in 20 minutes. I did not answer. When I finally called him back, I was calm. I told him I had retained legal counsel and that all communication going forward should go through Sandra. He said, "Layla, please, can we just talk?" I said we could talk once he had his own attorney and both attorneys had spoken. He said I was being cold. I said I was being careful. He said I was overreacting to documents I did not understand. I said my attorney and a forensic accountant understood them just fine. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Did my mother know you were doing this?" I said, "Did your mother know what she was doing when she helped you?" He had no answer for that. I said goodbye and hung up. 3 hours later, Patricia called me from her personal number. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. Her voice was smooth, controlled, almost gentle. She said she was worried about me. She said she hoped we could sit down as a family. She said some documents can look alarming when you do not have the full context. She said Daniel loves you, Layla. She said I was always one of them. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, then I forwarded it to Sandra. What happened in the next 2 weeks was something I had not fully anticipated. Not because I was unprepared for the legal proceedings, I was prepared. What I had not fully prepared for was the family. Marcus called me first. He said he had heard there was some kind of legal situation. He was diplomatic, he was careful. He said he was not taking sides. He said he just wanted to make sure I was okay. I thanked him and said I was fine. He said, "Layla, I want you to know that I did not know about any of this." I believed him, actually. Marcus had always seemed like the one person in that family who kept a careful distance from his mother's maneuvers. He sounded genuinely unsettled. Then Selene called. Selene, whose name had replaced mine in the will. Her call was less diplomatic. She told me I was destroying a family over a misunderstanding. She said Patricia had done nothing but welcome me from the beginning. She said some people cannot handle the natural flow of family business decisions. I thanked her for calling and told her that if she had any legal concerns, she was welcome to have her attorney contact Sandra. She said I was being a machine. I said I had learned from the best. She hung up. Then Gerald, Daniel's father, called. This was the call that caught me off guard the most. Gerald was a quiet man. He had always been kind to me in a distant, formal way. He called me from his personal number on a Sunday afternoon. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. He said, "Layla, I want to apologize." He said he had not fully understood what Patricia and Daniel were doing until the legal documents arrived. He said he had signed the will amendment without reading it carefully because Patricia had tea. Old him, it was a routine update. He said he was sorry. He sounded old in a way he had not sounded before. I told him I appreciated him calling. I meant it. Rima came and stayed with me for the weekend that followed. We sat in my living room and she listened to everything. At one point she looked at me and said, "You are not shaking. You are the calmest I have ever seen you in the middle of something hard." I told her I was not calm because I was not hurt. I was calm because I had stopped waiting to be confirmed. I had stopped waiting for them to tell me I was worth something. I already knew I was worth something. The documents I had given Sandra proved it. 60+ clients, 12 employees, 6 years of contracts in my name, a business that would not exist without my 70-hour weeks. I did not need Patricia to put my name in a will to tell me what I had built. Rima said, "That is the version of you I have been waiting 7 years to meet." The legal process moved quickly once it was in motion. Sandra had filed the formal claims based on 3 primary points: the forged power of attorney used in the loan agreement, the fraudulent operating agreement amendment executed without my consent or knowledge, and the misappropriation of business funds through the undisclosed external account. Each point had documentation. Each document had a paper trail. The forensic accountant's report was 38 pages long and left very little room for alternative interpretation. Daniel hired an attorney. His attorney was competent, but he had a weak position because the documents were what they were. Signatures that were not mine, transfers that could not be explained, an account that should not exist. You cannot argue your way around a forensic accountant's report when the trail is that clear. Patricia hired her own attorney separately, which told me everything I needed to know about how much solidarity actually existed in that family when things got serious. Mother and son, who had been operating as a unit for years, were now each trying to minimize their individual exposure. Their stories started to diverge. Daniel's attorney suggested that Patricia had handled the legal restructuring without his full awareness. Patricia's attorney suggested that Daniel had directed the restructuring and she had only participated in an advisory capacity. They were pointing at each other, which meant neither of them could construct a coherent defense. I watched this happen through Sandra's updates. I did not feel satisfaction in the way people might expect. I felt something quieter, something closer to clarity. This was always what they were. I had just not been able to see it clearly from inside the warmth of their carefully constructed welcome. There was a mediation session about 6 weeks into the legal process. We sat in a conference room, me and Sandra on one side, Daniel and his attorney on the other, with Patricia and her attorney attending separately via video. Daniel looked like he had not slept well in a month. I had slept fine. I had started sleeping better the week I moved my things out of the house and into Rima's spare room. The house was in both our names. Sandra had ensured it stayed in both our names pending resolution. Daniel looked at me across that conference table and said, "I never wanted it to get to this." I looked back at him and said, "I know. You wanted it to get to the part where everything was transferred and I never found out." His attorney placed a hand on his arm. The mediation produced an initial settlement framework. It was not final, but it was a beginning. My ownership stake in the business was restored to 50%. The fraudulent operating agreement was voided. The loan against my personal assets was to be unwound, with Daniel's share of business assets securing the debt going forward rather than any assets jointly held with me. The external account and its remaining funds were frozen pending the Attorney General's review of the fraud complaint. That review was ongoing. I was advised not to comment on its likely outcome. I also filed for divorce. I want to be clear about why. It was not out of anger. By the time I filed, I was past anger. I had processed anger in the 11 days between finding those documents and Daniel receiving Sandra's letter. By the divorce filing, I was simply recognizing a truth that the documents had clarified in the starkest possible way. This marriage had not been a partnership. It had been a setup. A man I had loved had used my love as cover for taking from me. His mother had helped design it. And whether or not I could ever believe he had loved me in some form alongside all of that, the question no longer mattered. What mattered was who I was going to become in the second half of my life, and that version of me was not going to be built on a foundation someone else had been quietly hollowing out. The divorce filing became known to the extended family within about 40 hours. Information travels fast in families like theirs. The calls and messages that followed fell into three categories. The first category was silence. About half the relatives simply said nothing and disappeared, which was its own kind of answer. The second category was unsolicited mediation. Several relatives reached out to urge me to reconsider, to give Daniel a chance to explain, to think about the family. The third category, and the smallest one, was genuine human decency. 3 people from Daniel's extended family reached out simply to say they were sorry for what had happened to me. They did not ask me to forgive anyone. They did not tell me what to do. They just said they were sorry. I wrote each of them a real reply. Those 3 people were the only ones from that world I kept any contact with. Patricia did not call again after the voicemail. She sent one text about 3 weeks into the legal process that said only, "I hope you find peace, Layla." It had the feel of something composed with an attorney present. I did not reply. There was one more event. I had not planned for it, and I could not have predicted it. About 2 months after the mediation and about 5 weeks into the divorce proceedings, Daniel called me from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not pick up. I am still not sure why I did. He did not sound like himself. He sounded like someone who had been taken apart and could not remember where the pieces went. He said the business was struggling. Without the operational structure I had managed, without the client relationships that were largely mine, without the financial oversight I had provided for 6 years, things were not running. 2 clients had already left. One of the key employees had resigned. He was asking, he said, whether I would consider some kind of consulting arrangement to help stabilize things. I want you to understand what that call asked of me. It asked me to rescue the machine that had been built to take from me. It asked me to bring my competence and my energy back to something whose ownership had been quietly stripped from me. It asked me to be useful again to the people who had decided I should be erased. I told him no. I did so calmly and without lengthy explanation. I told him I wished the employees well and I hoped they would land somewhere stable. I told him I was not the solution to a problem I had not created. I told him I had somewhere to be. I did have somewhere to be. 2 months after the mediation, I had begun laying the groundwork for something new. I had taken my financial records, my client history, my professional reputation, and the clarity I had gained from 6 years of doing the real operational work of that business. I had conversations with Rima, who it turned out had been quietly frustrated with her own professional situation and had been wanting to do something different. I had conversations with 2 of the 12 employees who had reached out to me directly, not to take sides, but because they respected my work and wanted to know what I was doing next. I was starting over, but I was not starting from nothing. I was starting from everything I had actually built, which, as it turned out, was considerable. The new company was incorporated with my name and Rima's name. Equal partners, ironclad agreement, every clause reviewed before signing. Rima laughed when I showed her the agreement and said, "You are never going to trust a handshake again, are you?" I said, "I never should have." The operating agreement was 12 pages long and covered every scenario we could think of. It was the most honest document I had ever put my name on. Within the first 6 months, 4 of the clients who had been mine through the old business followed me to the new one. They had worked with me. They trusted my judgment. They had watched the previous company start showing signs of instability, and they were ready to move their accounts to somewhere that had steady hands at the wheel. Those 4 clients alone gave the new company a foundation most new businesses would take 2 or 3 years to build. By the end of the first year, we had 8 clients and 5 staff. By the end of the second year, we had 16 clients, 9 employees, and a referral network that made me genuinely proud. I will not tell you that starting over was easy. It was exhausting and frightening, and there were nights in Rima's spare room where I lay awake wondering whether I was strong enough for all of it. I want to be honest about that because I think this kind of story can sometimes make resilience look effortless, like the right person just naturally rises while everything falls away cleanly. It does not work like that. There are nights where you grieve not just the person you thought you married, but the future you thought you had, the family you thought you had joined, the version of yourself that believed so completely in the safety of love that she stopped watching. I grieved. That version of me, and then I let her go. The legal proceedings continued on their timeline alongside all of this. The divorce was finalized about 14 months after I filed. The settlement included my restored business equity, now fully transferred to me as a clean asset, and a financial settlement that reflected the forensic accountant's findings regarding the funds that had been misappropriated from assets I had a right to. The house was sold. My portion of the sale gave me enough to put a deposit on a place of my own. The Attorney General's inquiry into the fraud complaint was still ongoing at the time of the divorce settlement. I was told this type of inquiry moves slowly. I was also told that the documented evidence was significant. I am not someone who needed a criminal conviction to feel that justice had occurred. What I needed was to stop losing ground. That had already happened. Whatever else followed would follow on its own. Patricia, as far as I know, has never acknowledged any wrongdoing to any member of the extended family. She has, from what the 3 decent relatives relayed to me without my asking, told her version of events in which she was protecting the family business from someone who did not understand how family businesses work. She has found a way to frame it in which she was the responsible one. I was not surprised. People who do what she did do not usually experience a quiet reckoning. They experience a strategic reframing. That is who she was from the beginning. I had simply been too invested in the warmth she performed to see the calculation beneath it. Daniel, I heard through the same sources, eventually found a way to stabilize the business at a smaller scale. I did not ask how. It was not my concern anymore. What was mine was mine. What was his was his. That line had been drawn in court, in documents, in signatures that were actually mine this time. I want to tell you about a morning about 18 months after all of this started. I was in my own apartment. I had made cardamom tea. Not because of Daniel, I had loved cardamom tea before him, and I was not going to let that be taken too. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the tea and the morning light coming through the window, and I had a strange feeling that I could not immediately name. It took me a few minutes to recognize it. It was peace, not happiness exactly, not relief, just peace. The kind that comes when you are living in a life that is actually yours, when the work you are doing is work you chose, when the people around you are people who are actually there for you. When you do not spend any part of your day wondering whether the person sitting across from you at dinner is also sitting in some attorney's office rearranging the ground beneath your feet. That peace was worth everything. I think about the woman who sat on the floor of Daniel's office reading those documents. She had given so much for so long to people who had been counting, the whole time, on her being too trusting to look in the right drawer. She had been too trusting, but she had also been building something real. And when she finally looked, when she finally let herself see what was actually there, she did not collapse. She got calm. She called a friend. She found a lawyer. She made dinner and asked her husband how his day was. And then, in the quiet of the night, she started building a way out. I am proud of her. I am proud of myself, not for what I lost, for what I did with what remained. There are people in your life right now who are counting on your love being bigger than your awareness, who are counting on you excusing the strange thing you saw last Tuesday, who are counting on you being too loyal, too generous, too committed to the idea of the family you thought you had to look too closely at what is actually happening. I am not telling you to be suspicious of everyone. I am telling you to love people with your eyes open, to notice the things that feel off, to give grace, yes, but not unlimited grace. To know the difference between someone having a hard time and someone using your patience as cover. Love with your whole heart, and keep very good records. If you made it to the end of Layla's story, I already know something about you. You are the kind of person who stays, who gives second chances, who believes in people longer than the evidence probably supports. And that is not a flaw. That is a form of love. But I hope this story reminded you that loyalty is not the same as looking away. That patience is not the same as permission. That being kind to people does not mean you owe them your silence when they take from you. Layla did not scream. She did not beg, she did not give a speech. She got calm, she got documentation, and she got out. If her story moved something in you, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? And if you have lived something like this, if you have been the one who loved too generously while someone was quietly planning around you, I want to know whether you found your way out and what that felt like. This channel exists for those stories. Subscribe if you want to stay close to this space. There is more to come.